The first weekend of the Diablo IV beta is over, but is this game really any good? And how could we make it better? Let's take a look at the good and the bad. Let's start with trade. From the beta, I was pleasantly surprised by our ability to trade items. Early items, even rares, can be traded or freely given away. Now, if we assume that the rumors are true and that rare items in the endgame will be the best items in the game, this is big news. That would mean that the best in-slot items in D4 are tradable. That being said, legendaries still remain account-bound and in some cases can be better or best in slot, at least at this case in the beta up to level 25 for some characters. While I'm not sure how that progresses into the late game, like I said, if the rumors are true and that rares are going to be the thing, then it's good news. However, if we're gonna go that far, why not just make legendaries and all item rarities tradable as well? All it's gonna take is a patch where set items are introduced and are account bound, or where new legendaries are introduced and those of course are gonna be account bound. If any of those items at some later time in Diablo 4 become best in slot and are not tradable, it affects the entire economy of the game and certainly the feel a lot of players have and their trust in the economy of the game. Now, I understand there's a lot of solo self-found players out there who are adamantly against free trade, and there's actually a perfect solution that's been explored for this by Last Epoch. In that game, players can select from 2 different guilds and decide if they want better luck finding items or if they want the ability to trade all of the items that they find. Riker actually did a great job breaking this down in a previous video, and I'll link that here. But my final verdict on trade is that it has a lot of potential. I was very pleasantly surprised by how many items we could actually trade. I think all item rarities should just be tradable, and instantly a lot more players would have a ton of faith in the game's economy. And if it's possible to implement a system like Last Epoch, I mean, that would obviously be perfect for everybody. Let's move on to PvP. There wasn't any PvP in the beta, as there wasn't a PvP zone in the Fractured Peaks, which was the only area in which you could play. I was a little disappointed. This could suggest something in and of itself about the development of PvP so far. For example, if it was far along enough or even good at this stage in the game, they probably would have showed it off or tried to test it in the beta. However, PvP has been worked into the lore of Diablo 4, with Mephisto instigating these fields of hatred in certain areas of the world, and if you opt into PvP, well, be prepared. So it's not that I don't think PvP will be in the game, but be that as it may, not being able to test this in a beta might leave a sour taste in the mouths of a lot of players. Now, I understand it's not the same devs on the team that worked on D3 over a decade ago, but a lot of the player base hasn't forgotten. The promised PvP system of Diablo 3 never came, and not having PvP in the beta might have reminded the wrong players of that. More questions than answers pop up from this last beta, and I think a lot of people want to know the answer to them. For example, how will the mobility and evasion skills compare throughout the classes? What about the offensive skills? Are those balanced? And most importantly, what does dueling even look like? If we enter the fields of hatred, is it just a perpetual war zone or a free-for-all? Now, don't get me wrong, that actually sounds pretty cool in its own right. However, I think a lot of PvP players would prefer a bit more variety, possibly one-on-ones, maybe 4-man teams, maybe even PvP on mounts. Is that a thing? Do we know? We have exactly 0 answers to any of these questions at this point, and that likely won't change until the game is released, which is a little disappointing to me, honestly. Let's move on to graphics. Graphics in this game, man, those were good. I made sure my computer met the minimum requirements to run Diablo 4, and minimum is not a word used lightly over at Blizzard. Many players were experiencing game crashes and even reporting problems with other software on their computers while running D4. I experienced this problem personally on stream. At first, I chalked it up to me just not having the best computer. I mean, it's not a bad one, but it's certainly not top of the line. But apparently, this was a problem that a lot of people across the internet were seeing too. On my end, I personally don't really care about graphics that much, so I eventually just dialed them all down to the very minimum settings. I adjusted the dynamic shadows, and eventually, hey, the game worked and it didn't tax out my computer, which was good. But I mean, hey, that being said, graphics are good, right? They're too good for my computer. It's certainly no more work needed there, Blizzard. You fucking nailed those. Let's move on to gameplay. While there's nothing hugely surprising or groundbreaking about it to fans of PoE, Lost Ark, or Last Epoch, the devs certainly focused on perfecting the gameplay here, and you can tell. The combat is smooth, controls are responsive, and the mechanics are appropriately revealed to the player in due time. Believe it or not, it's actually not a complete pushover when it comes to difficulty either. You may find yourself running into difficult monsters in the overworld very early on, forcing you to learn the evade techniques along with other game mechanics. Bosses are also very nicely done, with different phases that I found extremely challenging at some points, especially if you're playing through solo. You can tell that this game is going to be very easy to pick up and learn, but certainly difficult to master, and that's the way a Diablo game should be, in my opinion. The balance of guiding players while not holding their hand was also almost perfectly done. On another note, I'm sure many avid ARPG players probably like the skill tree, but personally I found it to be a bit overwhelming at times, especially with character classes I was not immediately familiar with from other Diablo games, or really Diablo 2. For example, the Rogue. What would help a dumbass like me is maybe to have a toggle button between that skill tree, which is good in its own right, but we need a simpler one for big dummies. But having some sort of option to look at a different skill tree even could be a way for players to more easily visualize their build from the get-go. On that note, however, I did like how relatively cheap the cost is to restat the entire character. And granted, this was only up to like level 20, 25, but I really hope that doesn't change much at later levels. Now, I know that the devs did say something about that it would, but it's not too late. It's not too late to make this easy. The random dungeons, though, are a bit reminiscent of Diablo Immortal and other ARPG titles and could get repetitive to some players if they don't change significantly in the later game. Some suggestions that I have are possibly have boss rush dungeons. You could have a whole team of players just waiting in an arena for an ever-increasing difficulty mob of monsters that just keep spawning and coming until everybody dies. Might have to adapt that for hardcore a little bit, but I mean, it's just an idea. Just something besides crawling through a maze to find a key and unlock a door and fight a boss. Next up, the immersion in the story. All right, first things first, two pieces of shit in the sandwich. Let's just get them out of the way. Number one, the inventory screen is ass. It looks like we're trying to port this to a mobile game. While not everyone enjoys playing inventory Tetris and Diablo titles, I do understand trying to make it a bit simpler. However, it's so far away from the feel of a Diablo inventory when you open up that screen, it just takes you out of the element. It needs to feel darker. You know, it's hard to quantify actual suggestions as to what it should look like, but all I can say is,
I'm not ready yet.
Number two, this is just a friendly reminder that the official font of the Diablo franchise is Exocet. Just in case anybody on the team who does all the words didn't know. That being said, though, there's actually some really good things with regard to the immersion in D4. Let's start with the story. The story is simple and understandable, making it rewarding for players who choose to watch all of the cutscenes or for those who skip through them after a few seconds. But with cutscenes like these, I don't know why anybody would.
Resist her temptation.
Many players focus a lot on graphics, but one extremely immersive aspect of video games often gets overlooked, and that is music. I will say, the musical score throughout this entire game is phenomenal. You feel like you're in the world of Sanctuary, with scores adjusting based on combat and location. Quite possibly, though, the only glaring oddity with the music is that the immersion is lost due to a lack of dynamic transitions in certain places. For example, you can notice it when approaching the cathedral in Kiovashad. That is something that I call a lazy fade, and it's sort of an awkward way to do a transition. During boss fights and combat, however, they've done a great job at hiding the fact that the musical score is not dynamic, and they do this by transitioning between these scores with loud sounds and animations. Honestly, something like that, good enough. Now, I know some people don't care about this as much, but let's be real. This is Diablo 4 and an opportunity for this game to set a precedent for future ARPGs and to increase the immersion level substantially. One game we can look at for an example of a dynamic immersive score is Octopath Traveler 1. In this game, as we approach a boss fight, we're reading dialogue with our character, watching cutscenes. No matter how long it takes the player to read the dialogue and to hit that button to advance, the score will magnificently transition to a musical crescendo and then eventually the boss battle theme.
You'll have to earn the right! I will not fail. The battle is truly joy.
Again, it's not necessary, but it's a big opportunity for Diablo 4 to step it up and show everyone else how it's done. But those are just my thoughts. Be sure to let me know yours down below. And while you're down there, hit that subscribe button. Do it now while I'm pressuring you with this dynamic musical score. You didn't do it right there, did you? That would have been a perfect time on the downbeat. Fucking players and their free choice these days. You know what? Take your time. Just hit it whenever you're ready. Good choice, Traveler. But now, you've unleashed my ultimate form!